It's 5:30, so we're going to begin, and if anyone is a little late, we'll welcome them later. So, warm welcome to this Zoom session and meetup. It's our first meetup in the series that we're planning to do, and in the first round, we're going to kick off with Agile Talent Acquisition. And this is the first time we're doing this type of meetup, and it's a bit special to do it remote. So please have patience if we are experiencing any technical challenges. But the agenda for tonight, first of all, we'll kick up with some practical stuff and of course presentation of who we are. We're going to go through some theoretical basics of the Agile framework and the mindset. We're going to look at some challenges that we see with traditional talent acquisition, and we're going to compare it to Agile talent acquisition. And finally, we're going to look at how you can design your Agile talent acquisition department and some to-dos to really kick off working in Agile talent acquisition. And finally, a quick wrap up. So first of all, some practical stuff. We're going to do approximately a 45-minute presentation, and then for the ones who want to stick around, we're going to stay online for some deepening questions, and also allow you guys to unmute yourself for some questions and discussions. If any questions pop up during the presentation, you can, I think it would be preferred if you chat them to Mattias Jansson, who should be in the participant list. So you can use the chat function and privately chat your questions directly to him, and we will go through them at the end of the session. And of course, I'm going to share the presentation and some references if you like. You can send me an email or ping me in the meetup group. Also, for your information, we're recording the session so that we can save it if anyone would like to share it with some of your colleagues or partners. And to get the most out of this presentation, we suggest that you use show active speaker video according to this little picture. Okay, to start with, behind this meetup today is half of the strength from recommended by, so it's myself, Charlie Bjurström, Carin Ewald, and behind the scenes it's Mattias Jansson, who is helping us facilitate some questions that you might have. And we continuously meet organizations that fail to develop and keep their talent, and we ask ourselves, why is this? Recruitment processes today are generally shorter compared to a few years ago, but it takes longer from first candidate contact to actual hire. Talent acquisition is super expensive in many organizations, and we feel that if we don't put all that money into our talent acquisition, we won't fill the positions. And this is despite that we have basically all the data in the world to help us understand and optimize the process and gain insights on our talent supply. So at Recommended By, we see it as our mission to help organizations understand the talent journey and their talent supply by making talent acquisition an advisory and more of a business partner. And we do this by being passionate about the sustainable growth, which is not a quick fix, it's a mindset shift. And since we're going through that mindset shift, we call ourselves Agile HR professionals. So first, I thought I'd give you a crash course in Agile and just look quickly at the Agile Manifesto, which was written in 2001 to help basically the software development community to continuously create value throughout their development process. It contains a set of principles, 12 to be precise. I will not go through all the principles. You can read them on agilemanifesto.org, but I'm going to go through really quickly what the Agile Manifesto is about. And what we believe in when we're talking about the Agile Manifesto, it's that we put individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We put working software over comprehensive documentation. We put customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And we believe in responding to change over following a plan. And that is, while there is value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So why Agile? Well, it's basically about alignment, increased efficiency, motivation, value output. And the Agile mindset, it's not a new concept. It wasn't in 2001 either. It wasn't a new concept even when it was adopted by the large part of the software community. But it very efficiently summarizes several of the organizational concepts for sustainability, profitability, happiness, and of course, growth. And this is a mindset shift. So remember, when we grow, it hurts a little bit. And this is a few examples that we have when it comes to how we will shift our mindset. We move away from top-down to working bottom-up and top-down in the organization. We move away from formal hierarchies to more informal networks. We move away from complexity and bureaucracy, and we try to keep it simple, and we quite often kill our darlings, and Carin will talk more about that when it comes to talent acquisition. We move away from projects and long-term planning and work more in teams and short-term projects where we use iterative planning. We move away from specialist and functional teams to working more in T or pie-shaped and what we call cross-functional teams. And we don't believe that decisions are made by the management. We believe that decisions should be made with the one in the organization with the most information. It could be the management, it could be someone completely different. And a new mindset is quite easy on paper, and it can also be easy aligning on these concepts in, say, for example, an HR management team. But we truly believe that it's the implementation to your everyday operations that's really hard. And this is especially if you're currently stuck in a traditional yearly planning, classic management, and a hierarchical structure. And we prefer to work with ways of working rather than processes, because we want to ensure that when we're faced with a new situation, everyone in our organization should feel safe to act based on the values and the way of working, even though we have no process. We can, of course, document it, we can learn, and if it's reoccurring, we can sign off on a new process. But the process itself is not the work. So how do we work? A lot of work here. But generally, we set goals that we don't reach. We can talk more about OKRs and in the end of the session. We try small and we scale. We scale what works and we scrap what doesn't work. We make room in our schedule to truly reflect and learn from our experience. We communicate often and a lot. We work transparent, which means that we share a lot of information. We partner up because we're better together. And we prioritize to make sure that we deliver the highest value first. And as you can see from these generic examples of principle for your daily operations, it can be practiced beyond the software development. I mean, it can be practiced by HR, finance, sales, procurement, management. They all can benefit from having an agile way of working. So if you're still not convinced, why should we move towards an agile way of working? Well, because greater communication, partnering up in buddy systems, networking, setting a safe to fail environment and culture, working in these types of iterative processes, quick feedback loops, scalable tasks, etc. This all mirrors our kind of basic human needs, and it feeds our brain to become smarter, faster, and more motivated. Will it make us more profitable? Maybe. According to some studies, there has been shown that the agile teams are more profitable and more efficient than others, but it will definitely make us more happy and more engaged, at least for the most people, according to recent studies. So moving on to talking a little bit more about talent acquisition, I would like all of you to just take a couple of minutes and think about what your greatest challenges are in your role today. Maybe that's a minute. I think that's enough. Feels longer when you're standing on this side of the camera. So I'm going to hand over to Carin to share a few of her experiences when it comes to difficulties in traditional talent acquisition.
Yes, hi all. And traditional talent acquisition, I guess most of you are familiar with it, either from a professional perspective, working as a recruiter, and most probably as a candidate as well. Some of you might even be hiring managers who've been in contact with traditional talent acquisition at time. It can usually be rather process heavy. It takes forever. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of steps in the process, and it can be quite hard to change those steps. But traditional talent acquisition can also be no processes at all. It can be totally ad hoc. And from my experience, we usually have a much better process when we hire more junior candidates. And the more senior candidates, the more ad hoc the process becomes. And this is very challenging from a quality perspective, I would say. And it also doesn't really put the candidate in focus, which is also very important from a talent acquisition perspective. And the question that I come across so many times is it's a difficulty for traditional TA functions to actually know how we are creating value. How do we add value to the organization, to the business? Of course, we can say how many hires we've done and maybe compare it if we went through an agency or something like that instead. But is that actually what the organization needs? And is that actually the value that we can add? And another very common thing within traditional talent acquisition is that we have a set of very loud stakeholders, and the stakeholders' interest goes before a more global talent acquisition strategies. Maybe we can have meetings and workshops and whatever to agree upon a roadmap on how to work with talent acquisition and talent supply overall. But it's very easy to fail on actually the prioritizations of what we should be doing, what we should be looking for, and what's actually the value added. And though a lot of things have happened the last couple of years, still a lot of systems are super complicated, and it takes a lot of energy and time and money to train users in them, and it doesn't always support the transparency that's needed to actually succeed in a great talent acquisition. And maybe the time will change this with better systems, but as of today, many of us are stuck in systems, perhaps not your ATS system, that may be the one that actually works, but you usually have to align with many other systems as well, and here it becomes quite difficult. And when you work more traditionally, usually the customer experience is not prioritized. And when we talk about customer experience within TA, we don't only talk about our main customers, that's perhaps our hiring managers, but also the candidates. And here we need to be sure that we talk both about active candidates and candidates that might be of interest down the road, and also candidates that have left and might be able to return. So it's more of a full life cycle prioritization you need to have. And I guess most of you know this. It's very reactive. There's a hiring manager running to your desk, desperate because their best employee just resigned. And you need to drop everything just to fill this position. And this, of course, makes it very difficult to do a good job, but also it doesn't really give you the time to reflect and learn and to improve, because you're so stuck with the day-to-day business that you need to handle and the things that you need to solve. And it's super expensive and extremely time consuming. You can see in many companies today, a few years back, a talent acquisition team wasn't even a thing at a company. This was something that just happened. Now many companies have large talent acquisition departments, but still use a lot of agencies, and there's a higher cost in systems, and there's a lot of more efforts in employer branding today. So it's super expensive and super time consuming. And the question we've been asking ourselves is, has it become better? Do we get more for our money now than we did like 5 to 10 years ago? So this is what got us thinking a bit, and have found ourselves a new approach towards TA. And here we have something that we might call Agile Talent Acquisition. And to define it a bit, it's that with an Agile mindset, we can break down our TA work into small tasks where every step is evaluated, and more specifically, it actually adds value. We can call it an iterative work cycle, and why we do it and what it actually means is that it increases speed and efficiency, and it decreases lead times. And to give you perhaps one very simple example is that you most probably have a list of projects that you would like to do. Maybe we should do this activity, or we should implement this, but you never get the time to do it. But by doing it in an agile manner, you can actually get things done and decrease the lead time. We'll come back to this, but this is just so you have some kind of example top of mind. And it gives you an opportunity to align both if you call it the talent strategy or the workforce strategy, or whatever you call it, with our actual daily operations. More simply said, how do you know that you're on the right track with your daily work? Or how do you know that your talent acquisition team are doing the right things? It also gives you an opportunity to reduce costs. And this is super important to actually be able to reduce cost. And when we talk about cost, it's not just money, it's also time and effort and competence and all the other things. But by reducing cost, we free up time and money to do other things that adds more value than the things that we're doing right now. And we have so much data now, as Charlotte mentioned earlier. We have all the data in the world, but this can increase predictability. And if we track our performance, our data, and the experience, we can actually learn a lot and improve. And it also, as we will talk about later on as well, give you actual numbers so you know which darlings to kill. And that's very important. It improves the customer experience, primarily through being very transparent. A very common way of doing this is to have some kind of scrum wall where you actually show what you're doing, so for all of the organization to actually see what you do. And here it's also super important to remember that the customers is not only your hiring managers, it's also the candidates. So by having a transparency towards the candidates is also very important. And why this is so much fun is because it continuously improves your processes. And by being lean and adaptive and innovative, you can actually do a better work or a better result each and every day that you work. And that's a strong drive, I would say, for all of us. So this is super nice words. And how do you actually work on it in more practically? So how do you design your Agile TA? And maybe you've heard about the company IBM, and they put together a list. We think it's a really great list because it says exactly the same things that we would like to say. So, but they've identified 5 prerequisites to succeed when you actually are transforming your talent acquisition position. And the first one, super important, it's commitment. And this is that you actually promise to accomplish all defined tasks that you have in each sprint, and you build a trusting partnership between the talent acquisition team and the hiring managers. And this might be super easy to say, but it takes a lot of work to actually do this and to actually deliver on it as well. That's why it's so easy, good to have a tool like sprint planning and things like that, so you can define what you're actually doing and follow it, and doing it in perhaps 2-week sprints, so you can cut it down to smaller pieces. Focus is the second one, and it's to have focus on deliverables and provide an outstanding experience to both hiring managers and candidates. And this focus, I think, if you work perhaps in a larger organization and perhaps you're part of an HR team or something like that, usually the focus can sometimes be shifted from the your customers, the hiring managers and candidates, to other more internal things. And this is something that we would like not to happen. And it's by being able to focus, you can actually also deliver more on what adds value. Collaboration. You need to utilize the Agile principles, the tools, the metrics, and transform how recruiters work together in a team. And some of you, I guess, come from an agency recruitment background. Historically, it's been perhaps a rather tough environment where you fight each other over candidates and businesses and deals. But to succeed as a TA team, you need to actually collaborate and work very closely together, because we actually do have a common goal. Innovation, also very important, and something that you sometimes lack time to focus on. And this is to enable teams to meet the changing business needs. And this you can do by having frequent retrospectives, iterations, bottleneck identifications, and adaptations, because you can't work with talent acquisition the same way you did today, or the same way you do today as you did 5 years ago. And empowerment. And you need to empower teams to make decisions, to remove obstacles. You need to actually take some calculated risks to deliver their commitments on time and within the scope. And here you need to challenge, and it can be a bit scary, but it's what you actually need do. And sometimes we hear this, and I know many other people hear it, that you don't have any control when you work agile. But agile is not having control, but agile is actually to have real control. You delegate your decisions to the ones in the organization who has most of the information on the issue. And this will not only increase the chances to find great solutions, but it also increases engagement within the team and within the organization. And I know all of you have heard about the numbers, I don't remember from where, but how many or few people are engaged at work.
15% of the global workforce from the Gallup research from 2017. So
yeah, perhaps it's worth taking this risk and increase it. So what should you do? And there are several things that you can do, even though perhaps your dependencies throughout organizations, or if you're stuck somewhere and you don't see this actually happening, because it's quite a challenging mindset. But you can start very easily by starting to document and visualize your TA processes. And this gives you a great insight. And it's super simple. You don't even need to have Post-it notes. You can just write it down. What do you do? Where do you spend your time? How does the process look like? And the most important one, you need to measure your work. And you need to mature your metrics. When you start, perhaps you don't have everything that you need, but you can always start with your ATS system. You can start by calculating where do you put your own time. You can, when you have all of these smaller informations, you can ask perhaps a bit larger questions on the talent supply. How does the market look like? Things like that. You can also reach out to your HR function, your finance function, analytics. Maybe you have that one in your organization, and ask them. They have a lot of numbers, and it's also a really great partner to have in this, because you can find really great synergies with the already existing HR processes. And to give an example, maybe one of the metrics could be how long someone stays at your company. Is it 2 years? Is it 8 years? This gives you great insights on where to put your efforts and actually calculate when would it be time to start finding a new one for this position and things like that. When you know your metrics, I mean, you can start controlling them. It's quite easy to see where it drives costs in your TA department. And from that, you can start iterating your process. Second or thirdly, ask your customers and align the process with them. Here you can have several different tools. You can use surveys for candidates. You can have informal meetings or information sessions with the hiring managers. You can have other internal stakeholders that you need to ask. Use the data that you already have to make sure that you're aligning the process with them. Ensure that they understand why we're doing things the way that we want to do them and that we think it's important. And you are the experts. You're the TA experts, and you should know what needs to be done. And you need to be able to present it as well. And if you have the right numbers, you can actually do this. But if you fail to actually motivate the process, it's very difficult to create alignment. Prioritize and kill your darlings. This one, we talked about it. When we grow, it hurts a little, and this can hurt a lot. You need to remove parts of the process that doesn't add value. Perhaps it doesn't add value now. It perhaps not prioritized at this stage, but it might return later on when you iterated the process a couple of times and your process has matured. And to give an example, I love interviewing. It's the best thing in the world. But I've noticed in several occasions that the value I add by interviewing isn't good enough. It's not something that I can actually defend doing. So instead, we found a way to teach the hiring managers how to interview instead. And now I can do other kinds of interviews as well. But in the beginning, it hurt a lot because that's a lot of your identity as a recruiter, that you do actual interviews. And you need to implement OKRs. I don't know if all of you know what OKRs are. Charlie, maybe you can explain what an OKR is.
OKR is basically a way for us, it stands for Objective Key Results, and it's a way for us to create direction in an organization and align on direction. And then we use key results, so that's the objective, that's the direction. But we might not have like the specific details on how we're gonna get there, but we know we're aligned on where we're gonna move. So we use key results as a way to measure that we're on the right track. And I mean, the big difference between key results and KPIs is KPIs. I love KPIs. We can have as many KPIs as possible, but it's not always that we ensure that the KPIs are driving us in the right direction. But key results creates more alignment for the objective. So read in on that subject, or we can talk about it later. But it's a really good way to really align the process, especially for talent acquisition. But don't call it AKRs, don't call it KPIs, just measure, track and measure. Whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. But it's about metrics and alignment are keywords here.
And last but not least is that I guess many of you are working in some kind of perhaps tech organization. So you perhaps have Scrum Masters already within your organization that you can get some help from. Maybe you need to hire an Agile coach to upskill your team. But the core is that if you master the more Agile framework, this will become much more easy and you get a faster and better result.
Good stuff. So just a quick wrap up before we move into questions and discussions. Some takeaways from Agile Talent Acquisition. What we really want you to bring from this session is to use design thinking in terms of Agile framework. So you theorize, you test, you measure, and you continuously iterate your process. We are totally dependent on feedback. We need to dare to ask the question if we're creating value for our separate stakeholders, and we really need to know our customers, our candidates, our hiring managers, or our CXO team, or whoever that we need, because they are basically the ones that we need to create alignment with. So don't be afraid to get feedback. Feedback is part of, this is how we learn, and this is how we get better at what we're doing. Retrospect, start small, fail fast, and then we retrospect. So we learn from what we're doing. We learn from our failures. So we're not afraid to fail. We're embracing it, and we need to set a safe to fail culture and environment to really be able to be innovative and try out new things and test and kill our darlings. Maybe we kill the wrong darling. Okay, we learn from it. We can iterate and take it back. Network. I mean, use your internal resources. We find sometimes that talent acquisition and maybe part of HR traditionally works in silos and they sit with their own projects. Move your projects out to the organization, not at least to get input from other teams. Use the analytics department to help track and trace your numbers and your metrics. There's so much to learn from from other competences as well. So network outside your organization, learn from the candidate market. You have so much insights from the candidates that you meet. And simplify your work. Dare to simplify it to a bare minimum, just to get you started. And be brave. We're on your side. We're here to coach and help. But really be brave and try. Kill your darlings. If they're not adding value, you're not making other people happy. So be brave. You want to add anything?
No, I just really encourage all of you to just start small. Start with some small thing and actually try it out, because it will almost change your world, but most will make it much more fun to work with talent acquisition.
So that was everything that we had to offer, but we have a few questions that we're going to go through. So if anyone wants to check out, that's fine. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself if you want to be part of the discussion. If you want me to share the slides, ping me on charlie@recommendedby.se or ping me in the meetup group or LinkedIn or whatever suits you. We're also recording the session, so we will keep it if you want to share it, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation.